He never raised a weapon. He simply stood, and every throne that saw him trembled. Because some chains break with silence, and some revolutions begin when one man refuses to kneel. The city of Vera was dying. It did not fall in fire or collapse beneath the weight of a foreign army. It unraveled the way all proud things eventually do, quietly, from within. The towers that once scraped the heavens now leaned into each other like drunkards, their steel bones creaking under the weight of forgotten promises. The great plazas where merchants once sang the glories of their trade were abandoned to dust and memory. Bridges sagged. Monorail lines hung snapped and lifeless. And in the heart of it all, amid the hollowed monuments and crumbling avenues, a human stood alone. Not because he had nowhere else to go, because he had chosen to. His name, if it had once been spoken with reverence or hate, had long since slipped into myth. Some called him the Last Watcher. Others, the Silent Thorn. But most, when they dared whisper of him, simply said, "He is the reminder." And here, in the ruins of Vera, he waited. The Council of Reclamation, the latest petty power to rise from the ashes, had demanded his appearance. They had summoned him like a servant, summoned him to answer for the unrest his memory sparked among the people. He had come, alone. No banners, no armies, only a simple cloak, ragged and gray, draped over scarred shoulders. A heavy iron chain coiled once around his wrist like a sleeping serpent. The council awaited him in the High Court, a shattered cathedral where law had once been declared with voices bold and trembling. Now it was a hollowed place, stripped of its grandeur, with broken mosaics casting fractured rainbows across the dust-choked air. The 7 counselors sat in a semicircle atop the remnants of the judicator's dais. Their faces were hidden behind ornate masks, gold, silver, iron, as if their authority depended more on artifice than on truth. At their feet lay a battered podium, the pillar of reckoning, dragged out from some forgotten basement for the occasion. A relic. A symbol. It would not be enough. The reminder stepped into the light slanting through the broken ceiling. Dust motes swirled around him like spirits seeking absolution. He said nothing. He needed to say nothing. The counselors shifted uneasily in their thrones. High Counselor Merrick, cloaked in crimson and pride, rose first. His voice cracked the silence like a whip desperate to bite before it was bitten itself. "You are accused," he began, "of inciting rebellion." No reaction. "You are charged," Merrick continued, "with undermining the fragile peace we have fought to restore." The reminder watched him with a gaze as steady and heavy as a planet's gravity. "And you," Merrick finished, jabbing a finger forward as if to pin the man to the moment, "will answer for your crimes." The words echoed off cracked stone and dying iron. The reminder remained motionless. Another counselor, her voice high and sharp like shattered glass, took up the litany. "You sow unrest wherever you tread. You whisper doubt into loyal hearts. You breathe insurrection into tired bones." Still silence. A third counselor slammed his fist upon the armrest of his throne. "You think memory will protect you?" he barked. "You think history favors the stubborn?" The reminder shifted, a simple, almost imperceptible movement. The council flinched. Because they knew. Memory does not favor. Memory does not protect. Memory endures. And those who build their empires on forgetting inevitably find themselves swallowed by it. "You have nothing to say?" Merrick demanded, voice rising into a shrill parody of command. The reminder tilted his head slightly, as if pondering a puzzle so small it barely warranted notice. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Steady. Unbreakable. "I have already spoken," he said. The words froze the air. Because they knew what he meant. Not with speeches. Not with armies. Not with decrees. But with standing. Once, long ago, against odds no sane creature would have wagered against. Once, when chains bound his limbs but not his will. Once, when silence roared louder than any weapon forged by frightened rulers. "You cannot kill an idea," the reminder continued, voice cutting through the stale air like a blade of purest intent. "You can chain it. You can bury it. You can silence it. But sooner or later." He raised his scarred hands, the broken iron chain catching the light. "It stands again." The council recoiled as one. They barked orders, summoned guards. But no soldier entered the hall. No footsteps answered the call. Because beyond the High Court, in the shattered streets of Vera, the people had gathered, drawn not by command, not by fear, by memory, by the whisper that had passed from mouth to mouth across the ruins of their world. He stands. And if he stood, so would they. Men and women, the broken and the forgotten, the young and the old. All stood in silence beneath the crumbling towers, their eyes turned not to the council but to the man who had refused to be erased. Inside the court, the reminder stepped forward. The counselors shrank back. Merrick drew a slender blade from within his robes, a weapon ceremonial and gleaming, meant for execution staged to remind the masses who ruled. It trembled in his hand. The reminder did not flinch. He did not fight. He merely advanced. 1 step, 2, 3, until the distance between memory and power collapsed into nothing. Merrick raised the blade high. The reminder looked at him, not with hatred, not with pity, With inevitability. Merrick hesitated. The chain flashed. In a single, fluid motion, the reminder wrapped the iron links around Merrick's wrist, wrenched the blade from his grasp, and hurled it clattering across the broken marble floor. The sound echoed like the shattering of centuries. The other counselors fled, abandoning masks, abandoning thrones, abandoning the illusions they had clung to like drowning men to a sinking ship. The reminder turned, faced the broken doors, faced the gathered people, faced the dawn clawing its way over the dying city. And he raised his hand, not in command, not in victory, in memory. The people answered. They raised their hands too. And in that moment, Vera was reborn. Not through conquest, not through blood, through choice, through standing, through remembering. The wind that swept through the streets of Vera that morning was not like any that had come before. It carried no scent of fire, no stench of decay. It carried memory. And memory, when loosed, does not whisper. It howls. By nightfall, the name Vera had been spoken in systems where the dust had not yet settled from previous wars. The feed showed no battles, no explosions, no bloody banners. Only a man, standing, chains coiled at his side, council chambers deserted. And the people, the broken, the bent, the forgotten, rising from their knees not with weapons, but with breath held as one. On Zaros, a planet known for its brutal taxation regime and orbital debt prisons, guards opened cell gates unprompted. They did not explain. They simply unlocked doors and walked away, leaving uniforms behind. On orbital platform TS9, a magistrate stood before a tribunal of his peers and laid down the seal of his office. I will not be remembered as a man who ruled with his back to the truth, he said. And then he walked. Alone. Silent. But never again bowed. Across the old reclamation sector, entire planetary broadcast networks looped the footage, the reminder unarmed, surrounded by authority, refusing to kneel. Then walking out as rulers crumbled behind him like ash. And in the background, the faces of the people, not cheering, not screaming, simply standing. It was more terrifying than any insurrection, because it was quiet, because it was shared, and because it could not be stopped. The Reclamation Council tried to spin the narrative. They issued statements, edited footage, claimed the reminder was a puppet of chaos, a remnant of forgotten rebellion. But no one listened, because people don't forget what they saw with their own eyes. And in the days that followed, Vera became something more than a city. It became a verb. To Vera, to rise without force, to stand without permission, to reclaim dignity through memory alone. In the military barracks of the sector's elite legionnaires, recruits scrawled the word on walls and weapons. Not as protest, as oath. Commanders responded with curfews, crackdowns, threats. But fear, once broken, is harder to weld back together than any shattered chain. And then came Dallas, a world built entirely upon obedience, a planet of glass towers and strict control, where the slightest infraction was recorded and punished with terrifying precision. There, too, they gathered. First 100, then thousands. No weapons, no slogans, only silence. And one night, no one knew who placed a stone on the steps of the overseer's palace. A rough, uncut rock, wrapped in a single length of chain. By morning, the palace was empty. The overseers gone. No force had touched them. Only memory, only fear of it. From the outer rim to the core systems, whispers spread. He has returned. But it was never about his return. It was about the idea he had reignited. An idea more dangerous than any fleet, more enduring than any dynasty. The belief that one person, one memory, could unmake thrones. In desperation, the remaining powers tried to fabricate their own figure. A manufactured hero. An official icon. But memory is not bought. It is earned. Forged in fire and silence, not sculpted in marble. And the people knew the difference. They always know the difference. The reminder himself was never seen in Vera again. He had no need to return. His work there was complete. And besides, he never stayed. He moved like time. Always forward. Always searching for the place where memory had gone thin and brittle. And when he found it, he stood. That was enough. On the frozen world of Harith, a child asked his mother, "What if he dies?" The woman smiled. He already did. They killed him once in chains and silence. And that's why he'll never die again. Because death cannot claim memory. And memory, once freed, refuses to kneel. It was not just tyrants who felt the weight of his gaze. Even the just rulers, those who believed themselves different, began to glance over their shoulders when the wind grew still. They felt it during speeches that demanded too much silence. They heard it in the hesitant applause after decrees meant to tighten control for the greater good. They dreamed of it, the quiet hall, the broken chain, the unblinking man who said nothing, because he had already said everything. He was no longer a person. He was a test, an invisible measure drawn into every chamber of power. A question that lingered unspoken beneath the crown, the robe, the authority. Would I survive if he stood in my hall? It changed them, subtly at first. Rulers removed titles from their names, abandoned the archaic trappings of divinity. Some dissolved courts entirely and rebuilt them as circles, with no raised dais, no separation between those who judged and those who lived. On Havenar, the young regent of the Fifth Reach declared an open assembly, allowing her people to veto any decision she made with a majority voice. They asked her why. She did not say his name. She simply said, because memory should not fear the living. In systems where the reminder's story had once been suppressed, it now pulsed from the hands of children drawing in dust, from the backs of old soldiers who tattooed his silhouette on their shoulders, from the stories sung in fields beneath the stars. A man, a chain, a silence so loud it brought nations to their knees. He was not seen for years. Some thought him dead. Others said he had become something beyond human, a myth stitched into the skin of the galaxy. But always, when memory dimmed, he returned. Not with fire, not with vengeance, with presence. It was all he needed. On the world of Talith, a corporate board controlled the lives of billions through biochains, devices implanted at birth to ensure loyalty and compliance. They ruled from orbit, untouchable, until one morning, a single man was found sitting in the lobby of their tallest tower. Barefoot, silent, a broken chain lying across his lap like a promise. Security arrived. Drones buzzed. And yet no one approached him. For 3 days, he sat there, never moving, never speaking. On the 4th day, the biochain networks collapsed. The people of Talith walked freely for the first time in living memory. The man was gone. Nothing left behind but the chain. And the silence that followed him like an anthem. It was not magic. It was not prophecy. It was fear not of death, but of irrelevance. Because those who rule through fear fear one thing most. The day the people remember they don't need to be afraid. Even the neutral powers, those great trade alliances and ancient peace sects, began to leave offerings at the places he had stood. Stones etched with no names. Chains too old to trace. Not as worship, as warning. Because memory is not sacred. It is dangerous. It does not kneel to custom. It does not bow to law. It does not forget. In the far reaches of the Marrow Worlds, a merchant captain told a story over firelight, a story he swore was true. He had seen a man step off a refugee freighter with nothing but a cloak and a limp. The station guards had tried to detain him. They had laughed at the rumors. And then they saw his eyes. And every hand went still. Every weapon lowered. The man walked through the gates. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The station fell silent behind him, and when the captain returned a month later, the entire ruling syndicate was gone. Not killed. Not overthrown. Just gone. Replaced by open councils. Replaced by people who remembered what it felt like to breathe freely again. No shot fired. Only memory. The reminder had passed through. And that was enough. It was bound to happen. One world, one ruler, one generation too far removed from fire and chain. They thought the memory had faded. That the silence had weakened. That the standing had ended. On the planet Avaran, the new Archon declared the era of correction. It began with new uniforms. Then came the banning of public assemblies. Then came the statues, tall, sterile, blank-faced guardians of order, rising where people once stood together in memory. And finally, the edict. Any mention of the reminder would be treated as sedition, punishable by exile, or worse. The people were quiet. They always were at first. But the silence was different now. It was not submission. It was waiting. And then, one morning, the Archon's high hall, polished to mirror perfection, guarded by armored sentinels, sealed by code and gene lock, found something on its steps. A stone. Uncut. Weathered. Heavy. Beside it, a chain. Old iron, oxidized and pitted, laid in a careful circle. No name. No threat. Just presence. The Archon laughed. Ordered it removed. It reappeared the next day. In his chambers. Next to his bed. Still no blood. Still no message. Just the thing he had tried to erase sitting quietly in the center of his power. His guards questioned one another. His ministers argued over sabotage. But none dared to touch the chain a third time. Because they remembered too late what others had learned the hard way. You can suppress truth. You can outlaw stories. But you cannot kill what lives in silence. And silence was no longer still. The day after, the Archon gave no orders. The hall remained locked. No one saw him again. When his ministers finally breached the chamber a week later, it was empty. No struggle. No sign of violence. Only the stone. Only the chain. Only a single phrase carved into the wall behind the throne. Memory does not ask permission. Across Avaran, the statues were torn down in a single day. Not by rebels. Not by mobs. By workers. By students. By soldiers who had once worn the new uniforms with pride. They dismantled the monuments stone by stone. Stacked them beside the fallen throne. And in their place, they left nothing. No icons. No banners. Only space. Because some memories do not need markers. They live in the gaps. In the quiet. In the standing, the ripples reached farther than even the reminder might have expected. On worlds where his name had never been known, people began to leave stones on courthouse steps, to wrap chain links around public fountains, to pause at midday and simply stand, not as protest, as affirmation, as a reminder to themselves and to anyone watching that what was broken once would never be rebuilt in silence. In response, the systems of order convened an emergency summit. They declared the spread of unauthorized silence a threat to galactic unity. They debated deploying force, deploying propaganda, deploying counter-memories. And in the middle of those debates, a stone appeared in the central chamber. No breach, no witnesses, just a stone on the center table. And beside it, a single broken chain. The summit ended within the hour. Its proposals never filed. Its members scattered to their own systems, some resigning, some disappearing. And in the years that followed, the systems of order faded into irrelevance. Not with war, not with rebellion, with memory. Because no matter how high the walls, no matter how many weapons pointed at the crowd, one truth had already spread too far to unlearn. If he could stand, anyone could. They stopped building statues, not out of fear, out of understanding. Because you cannot sculpt what refuses to sit still. You cannot cast in stone what was never meant to rule. And most of all, because the reminder was never about who he was. He was about what he meant. So instead of carving him into monuments, they wove him into the spaces between things, in the gaps between laws and loyalty, in the breath held before an unjust order is given, in the pause before the first baton rises in a protest square. He became not a figure, a pressure, a presence, a knowing. On the world of Ellis Morn, where education was considered sacred, every child began their schooling with a simple ceremony. No anthem, no flag, only a single question from the elder before the room of silent students. If chains return, will you kneel? And the children, no matter their age, no matter their world, would rise, place a hand on their own hearts, and say in one voice, "We will stand." It was not recited. It was remembered. The phrase appeared in thousands of languages, carved into doorways, etched into skin, written in the margins of bureaucratic documents and diplomatic treaties. And no one needed to ask what it meant, because by then, even those who ruled carefully, kindly, quietly, even they knew. Their legitimacy did not come from votes or titles or laws. It came from the space beneath the chain, and the silence that once shattered an empire. On the outer moon Bastion 6, a crisis broke out. A military governor attempted to impose curfew and ration by force. He was young, eager, unwise. He believed the legends were exaggerated, that memory was a candle to be blown out. He deployed shock troops, closed assemblies, arrested elders. And then, one night, he stepped from his quarters and found every street empty. Silent. Not a soul moved. Not a screen blinked. No message. No stone. No chain. But he felt it. In his lungs. In the press of space itself. He resigned before dawn. No protest followed. None was needed. Because the lesson had already been taught, over and over again, without words. The reminder could appear anywhere. In the shape of a hand refusing to sign a decree. In a line of workers choosing not to kneel. In a child who stands up when others are told to sit. And that was the final, quiet revolution. He was no longer one man. He was everyone. He was the merchant who closed his stall rather than comply with exploitation. The scholar who erased his name from the records of corrupt rulers. The prisoner who chose silence over confession. The voice that refused to shout, but never stopped being heard. Even in the farthest reaches, where the stars grew thin and the worlds were new and lawless, the settlers told stories not of earth, not of gods, but of the standing one. And when their children asked, did he really live? The answer was always the same. He lives every time someone remembers. They built no cities in his name, named no fleets in his honor, but they left stones, always stones, in the center of every new settlement, rough, untagged, and beside them, a place to stand. No rule books, no rituals, just space for silence, just space for memory. And that was all he had ever asked for. The stars no longer feared him. They carried him, like gravity carries light, like silence carries truth. In the quiet hours before dawn, in cities that had never known chains, people still paused when the wind changed, as if expecting someone to walk out of the shadows, barefoot, wrapped in dust, with a single broken link around his wrist. They never saw him. They didn't need to. Because he had become something deeper than memory. He had become the proof. Proof that fear can fall. Proof that no empire lasts when one person chooses to remain upright while the world demands they bow. In the deep archives of Orcs Theta, a historian recorded what became the most cited words in 1,000 years of galactic record. There are no more monuments. No more statues. But every time someone says no and stands, he rises again. He is not a hero. He is not a god. He is a mirror. And we, at last, have learned to look into it. On frontier worlds where names had yet to be mapped, when strangers arrived, the locals would ask only one question before offering shelter or help. Do you stand? Not as a test, as a confirmation, a ritual of survival. And if the answer came quiet and firm, I do, then no more needed to be said. Old tyrants tried to rewrite the story in their final years. They tried to claim he was a myth, a tool of subversion, a fabrication meant to undermine legitimate order. But their voices rang hollow, because no one remembered them. And everyone remembered him. Not the man, the act, the refusal, the stillness. In the central forum of Vera, where it had all begun, the court was long gone. The city was new, vibrant, alive. But the plaza where he once stood remained untouched. No markings, no inscription, just bare stone, polished by time and footsteps. People passed through it with reverence. Children played there, not knowing why they ran more softly across those stones. Lovers met there in quiet corners. Old ones sat in the shadow of memory, watching the sky. And once a year, on no fixed date, with no schedule, people began to gather. Some with stones, some with chain fragments, some with nothing but breath and memory. They stood, some for seconds, some for hours. They did not speak. They did not explain. Because what had to be said had already been said long ago without a single word. And above them, the sky turned and the stars watched. Maybe he watched too. Maybe he had never left. Or maybe, as some believed, he had never been a man at all. Only the moment when someone chooses truth over comfort, dignity over silence, standing over kneeling. And that moment, once born, cannot be killed. It passes on, from soul to soul, from age to age, forever.